So this is our first in-person session. It's titled Mental Health and the City. The discussion will explore how the design of the city, the public and private realms, shapes the mental health outcome of citizens. I'm happy to welcome our panelists for this evening. We have Varun Kurtkoti, who is a medium hopper. I think he'll tell us what that means, and works at the intersection of film, animation, music, and theatre. He has worked with communities across the state as an arts facilitator. Padmalatha Ravi is a multidisciplinary artist and a therapist, and has been a practicing expressive arts therapist for the past 5 years. She strives to bring in anti-caste and intersectional lenses to her work. Ankit Bhargava is co-founder at Sensing Local, a Bengaluru-based do tank focused on tackling environmental challenges in Indian cities. His practice revolves around using systems thinking and participatory processes to unpack complex problems. Rohan, Patankar, who will be moderating this discussion, is a senior design researcher and strategist at Quicksand, a transdisciplinary design thinking and innovation consultancy based in India. He's worked on projects about maternal health, organizational change in the humanitarian sector, research networks, and the cultural sector. Over to you, Rohan.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I think this is really special to be talking about the city in real life, I guess, in person. So we're really grateful that all of you could make it. This conversation is really one of the first public events that we're doing among a series of projects as part of Mindscapes. I'll just tell you a little bit about Mindscapes before we begin. Mindscapes is an international cultural program which aims to support a transformation in how we understand, address, and talk about mental health. Bangalore is one of the 4 cities in which Mindscapes projects are happening among New York, Tokyo, and Berlin. And while we have a team in Bangalore that is doing all of these projects, I work with Quicksand, and a few of my colleagues should also be here soon. In Bangalore, we have partners such as NIMHANS, the Museum of Art and Photography, IIHS, the India Foundation for the Arts, Science Gallery Bangalore, and a range of creative practitioners such as Varun and Padma who are working with us on these projects. And really the intention is to do almost like a parallel timeline across these cities in the world, and the project wraps up by March 2023. Where we would have hopefully had both local as well as global conversations on how cultural projects can be starting points to think about both mental health research as well as public policy advocacy for mental health. In Bangalore, we did a big convening of about 40 practitioners in June last year, where some of the things that came up included conversations around specifically missing voices, and not just people who are missing from conversations on mental health, whose mental health is by far not just sort of not seen, but also invisibilized sometimes because of their vulnerabilities and marginalizations that are pre-existing, but also how one can use art to think about shared language around mental health. Not just in terms of physical language, but how does one find people together or find the space to have these conversations. The second big piece that we want to focus on, which you also see on the poster there, is to talk about lived experience. And particularly in the context of policy, how does one foreground lived experiences, things that are valid and become valid forms of knowledge and evidence. So that's the second piece. And finally, how do we bring these different stakeholders, people who work with communities, people who work with research, people who work with policy, and real people with these experiences together, and not just people with experiences around mental illness, but also their caregivers who really know what it takes to live with and next to these challenges. Of course, it's not far-fetched for me to say that in the past 2.5, 3 years, collectively, each one of us, we've all sort of been through this time, which is really significant, transformative for all of us in big and small ways. We've seen so much together, not just loss, but also grieving, coping. And in so many of these ways, at least for some of us, we've done this in the city. We've all sometimes gone back to our hometowns, found the space between, and it's been really interesting. Just, I guess, for the city to hold all of this together and still somehow remain, right? Through the lockdowns, through the opening, through the auto rides, and through the masks or beyond and between the masks and so on. This conversation specifically then looks at how the city, through its design of small and big spaces, gives us these opportunities to foster mental health, but in many cases just disappoints us with what it has to offer. For this conversation, we have Varun and Padma, who will also speak briefly about the projects they've been doing as part of Mindscapes. And then we have Ankit, who runs Sensing Local, which is an excellent urban planning and strategy practice, where a lot of their work really are able to capture real conversations from the city. So welcome all of you. I'm really thrilled to be having this conversation with you. How we've structured this is that there are three sort of broad questions that I will pose to the panelists. We can go over maybe in rounds, however we want to take it. We'll spend about 15 minutes per round, and then we should have about 20 minutes or so for any questions, thoughts, or comments that you all have. If that sounds good, maybe we begin. Cool, great. Great, so the first question is really the big question that you see also on the screen. We do know quite widely that there are socio-ecological factors that contribute to mental health outcomes, right? It's something that has been widely studied in mental health research, that it's not just your predispositions, but very much also the surroundings that you are in. So quite simply, how does the design of the city shape mental health? Maybe what I do is start with Padma and then do whoever wants to respond then. Does that sound good? Sure, thank you.
Hi everybody. I'm holding a mic and looking at so many people for the first time in 2.5 years, and it feels surreal, like Rekha was saying, but also very nice to be doing things in person. Thank you for coming, and I'm glad that so far the rain has been kind to us, which speaks to the design of the city very much. Just that beautiful underpass, what we call magic box, the first magic box that we built in Bangalore, which I call Oberman Kindi because only one car can go at one time, which is the classic example of what the design they think we need and what the design we actually need. That is the crux of today's discussion, most likely is going to be, but Ankit can speak more to it. Talking about where I'm coming from in terms of city and what mental health means and what the cityscape means for mental health. I'm born and brought up here. I've spent all my life in Bangalore, and I've lived in different parts of Bangalore at all times. And it's been very interesting what each neighborhood looks like, right? What's the first thing that comes to mind when I say, apart from the traffic jams and the non-existent roads right now, but what is the thing that comes to your mind when I say Bangalore? The weather, the Cubbon Park. Sorry? Masala dosa. I vote for that. In terms of infrastructure, yeah, the parks and the beautiful greenery, the weather, which is largely due to the elevation of the city, right? But where I've lived in different parts of the city. I grew up in this place called Yeshwantpur, which is not too far from here. It is about 3-4 kilometers from here. I didn't have access to a park growing up. The closest park was in Malleshwaram. I had to come to Malleshwaram to access parks. Or once a week, we would go to Cubbon Park like every Bengaluru in the 80s and 90s. But that's how far I had to go for a park, right? And then I moved to the suburbs of Bangalore, the newer suburbs of Bangalore, which is near Bomanelli. And I lived in a fancy apartment complex, so I had a park within the place, so I could access that. But if I step out, there is Silk Board Junction. So my greenery ends there, and there are no trees on the entire stretch. And now I live in this very beautiful part of cantonment where, you know, the Cook Town and all the Fraser Town and all that, where there is greenery all around, all along. And I can tell you, where do you think mental health is most reasonable of these three places? Yeshwanthpur, Bomanali, Cook Town. Cook Town. Why? Right? There's green space, there is lung space, there is space to park your car. I'm not fighting with I do fight with my neighbor over parking, but that's because we have too many cars. But everyday life is much more easier in a place like Cook Town. Bomanali, I had access to it. Like, my apartment complex was fairly self-sufficient, right? One of those new age thingies where there's a shop inside, somebody comes and delivers things, I didn't have to go out. But no greenery, I can't get out. If I have to go out to buy fresh vegetables, which is in Madiwala, which is 5 kilometers away from my house, and I have to cross Silk Board Junction, which is not worth it, even for Avrekadu. Right? So you just don't do it. You just don't do it. So we don't think about city where the location is, who you are, and your caste location, your class location when it comes to mental health. We just think it's there. Everybody goes through trouble. Yes, that's true. Everybody goes through trouble. But the intensity of it matters to these things. Right? This is a very fascinating project by this journalist called Sumanto Mondal. Right? He's done this, let me get this right. He does this data visualization and mapping of caste lines in the city. So it's based on the topography of Bangalore. You can access it on Google Maps. If anybody is interested, I can share the links. So it talks about where each city location is, each locality in the cities. For example, Sadashivnagar, where we are all sitting right now, the elevation is about 930 meters, right? And there is greenery. The sewage problem is fairly managed here. I don't know how many of you live here, but I don't think the roads were that bad the day before yesterday's rain. But what happened to all the water that drained out of here? It goes down. It goes down to Guthalli. It goes down to Srirampura on that side. Who lives there? What happens to their access to better living? This is not a popular opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway. The Manusmriti that we all hate to love, or love to hate, depending on which side of the line you are, talks about, if you look at ancient city designs, right, talks about who gets to live in which part of villages, not cities, villages, right? Which community is in which part of the village. Further away, the Brahmins, the Vaishyas sit in one part of the village. The farther away is the secondary, caste. Even farther away is the Dalits and, other castes that we pretend like don't exist. I guarantee you that if you look at the city design today, we are still following Manu's rules. We don't want to acknowledge it. We feel guilty about it, especially because a lot of the social privilege and economic privilege we come from. But the fact is, this is how the city is designed. And we cannot escape that. And what happens when the city is designed like this? We talk about how the amenities keep coming to places where the richer people live, or the MLAs and the MPs live. Why is that? Because of this. And just have a think about the neighborhoods you live in. What is the caste and community matrix there? How many people, what kind of food they eat, what kind of festivals do they celebrate? And all this matters in terms of mental health, right? And the mental health as an institutional setup, if you look at it, Some of the statistics is quite staggering. Currently, we have about 9,000 psychiatrists, registered psychiatrists in India. We know India's population, right? That's about 0.75 per 1 lakh population. Not even a whole psychiatrist, like 0.75 psychiatrists for 1 lakh population. And in developed countries, it's 6 per 1 lakh. And we have arrived at some number, I don't know how, but we've decided that 3 is enough for us. Okay? And we don't even have 3, and we're not going to get to 3. Because we have about 700 psychiatrists passing out of the educational systems. This is not including psychiatrists, psychologists and therapists and counselors like me. There is no registered system. RCI is there, but I can practice without it. And there is no regulatory system per se. So there is accessibility is an issue. And I do practice, right? Like, where do I practice? I practice from my house, which is in Cooktown. Or I had an office before COVID swallowed my office space. I was in Indranagar. Who can access those spaces? Or now I'm online. In the last 2 years, people from across the world are accessing mental health from people like me. But who is accessing it? You have to have a decent internet connection. You have to have a phone with camera. You have to have a space to sit and talk from, because privacy is a luxury. Right? And during COVID, I was grateful that I had a space that I can, stay locked up in for months. It was not fun. It was a struggle. But at least I could isolate myself. What happens to my domestic worker? 7 of them in one room house. If one of them gets COVID, where do they isolate? And how do I make it okay for them to do it? Like, when the lockdowns opened up, she called up and said, I want to come because I can't deal with everybody at home. I need space. I want to get out of the house. I will wear mask. I will take vaccination. She is extremely scared of needles, but she was like, I will do it. Because I can't sit at home staring at 6 other people. They all lost jobs. All the men in the house lost jobs. So what happens to mental health in that case? And we do tend to look at it as a class thing, that she comes from a particular class. That's true, but she also comes from a particular caste, which makes it that much more difficult for her to get out of that situation. She's not educated. Her children barely manage to do class 10. Not because they're not smart. They lived in Bengaluru all along. So what happens to their mental health? Yeah, and also this location of, like I was saying, Indranagar. Okay, I'll quickly wind up. Location of these counselings and therapies options, where do they access from? Where does my domestic worker go if she has a problem? Whom does she access? Government hospitals? Do they have psychiatrists? Do they have counsellors? They have psychiatrists who will give you a pill. They'll write a prescription and even give you a free medication, but do they have access? That's the question. Sorry, I think I took up too much time.
Sorry, I've never heard my own voice on mic, so I might be a little clutch brake, accelerator clutch brake, so if you have any questions in the middle only, you can ask, or Padma has covered most of the things that, in terms of the physical thing, infrastructure and all that. What I wanted to touch upon was the idea of how we are surrounded by visuals. And okay, actually, let me start with one thing which is from my memory, which is I'm from Dharwad. I was born and brought up in Dharwad I was there all my life. And my mom and dad, they would come to Bangalore only to meet some relatives or something like that. We're not from a well-to-do family or something like that, so it means that your access to many things is constricted. One hobby that my mother and my father developed even before I started going with them was the idea of window shopping, which was basically going to all the places, either on MG Road, here, there, wherever, and just going through. Kaveri Emporium was a big thing back then. Just doing window shopping. And then I also joined them. And then my fondest memory, and I think my introduction to Bangalore, or any city for that matter, is through this idea of window shopping. And why I'm mentioning this is how much of the visuals that we see around us construct our imagination of where we are living and what we are living in, and how, whether we belong to the place or not. And I mean, a city is an imagined space. It's constructed all right, infrastructure here, all okay. But it's an imagined space, but not a space for imagination. When I say that, I mean that who gets to imagine this space, right? Like I'm walking, I'm not the right example for this, but if a person who is walking through the city, how much of what we see all around us, like there is sensory overload, and how much of that directs our attention and tells us what to think and what not to think, is something that we have to think about, is something I'm thinking. In that way, I also feel like living in a city, or like being in a city, is like a film. You're always directed. It's an edit. Like you're moving from one thing to another thing to another thing. You never have a space of respite where you can ask yourself, what am I looking? And I think that matters a lot, because we do lack spaces of silence, of reflection, and an expression of our own imagination, I feel, which is very much related to mental well-being, is missing. And what happens, I work mostly with film, and I'm trying to like slowly move from making films to facilitating people to make films. And what I'm realizing in this process, one thing is that, the other thing, sorry, I'll just one step back. The other thing is how we carry our the city in our pockets with our phones. And again, the visual element, again, the idea of imagination, and how much of it is directed for us by these visuals is something to think about, because we are constantly orientated according to these visuals, which means that we are constantly told how to think, what to think. And now the next thing connected to that is who gets to express this imagination, and where are these spaces where we can express these imaginations becomes very important. And yeah, now coming to the idea of the filmmaking part, one of the things that I'm realizing more and more is that I used to work as a documentary filmmaker. Most of my idea of filmmaking came from there, learned filmmaking from there. And I began realizing how much of the imagination of a person is is dependent on the person who holds the camera or does editing. And that again matters a lot, which again connects to this idea of imagination. And if I am not allowed to express my imagination in this shared space, is that my space? And if it's not, then whose constructed reality are we living in? And these are not things that we are going to be like thinking consciously, right, all the time. But these are things that delve in our minds subconsciously, in not maybe the same language. But yeah, I just wanted to touch upon that, about how this really factors into how much space we have mentally between people, because that shared space is where we share our imaginations also. And there are some micro imaginations that we always do share. There are these anarchical spaces amongst ourselves where we do share the imagination. But it's where does it go from there is just something that I ponder upon, I guess. Yeah.
Super interesting. I will just do a plug-in here that if you go to Cubbon Park and if you see the signage there, you should know that that is constructed imagination from Ankit and Sensing Local.
I also say that it is now full of ant colonies, and I feel really bad about it.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay, this mic is weird. Okay. When I was sitting here, I feel like an oddity because like I'm not the artist. And a lot of our work is all about removing ourselves from the situation as urban planners and really trying to listen to the other person. And so majority of our effort is actually in the listening and co-creating with other people, and you're always trying to move yourself out of the equation, because at Sensing Local, we are anti top-down, like big time. Like you are purposefully trying to stop this thing where somebody decides on the top of what the future of things are, as you're saying, and trying to actively construct processes to reverse this thing. But I think as we're talking today, I just feel like it would be unfair if I didn't put my bias in the room. My bias is that my life is constructed as a migrant. My primary identity is of a person that has had no home. Since I was 10, I've been in a hostel all my life and never really had a sense of home. So the elephant in the room in India is the migrants, that people don't understand the cities are in flux, that most of your population is on the move. And so people don't understand identities as fluid, as hyphenated identities. You're always trying to make, oh, are you a Bengalurian or not? Are you a Karnataka citizen or not? Are you this one? You're from here, you're from there. And these have huge influences in how you then find your sense of place and belonging as you move from city to city, looking for jobs, looking for opportunities, and that is the current state of India, which people just refuse to acknowledge, including how you get your voter card, which has to be in one place. My passport address is in a different address, voter is in a different address, Aadhaar is different address, like completely different addresses. All of these are rental properties. So like this causes mental stress. Your sense of self is completely fragmented. So I just want to plug that in, that this fundamental state is this. This is the sense of India which we completely refuse to acknowledge. But I thought as urban planners, I think in the beginning you were talking about how the environment shapes you, and I couldn't help but think about that. Definitely a lot of our work deals with actually improving infrastructure to improve livability in the city. Mental health is not spoken about. Nobody cares, nobody talks about it. No funder looks at that as a KPI. The government does not think about it, even in their dreams, they don't. And so it is a factor that I can only tell you is embedded and not on top. So when we are looking at the work that we do revolves around air pollution, waste management, now a lot of the work on sustainable mobility. If you look at all of these things, how you travel in the city has huge impacts on your mental health. All the people who travel for 1 hour in the car or bus or whatever, oh man, like by the time you reach office, not only is your back sweating, your mind is already somewhere else. That's a mental health issue, but we see it as urban planners as an issue of affordability, access, and the state of their infrastructure. Like I used to take buses for 2 hours and my back used to hurt every day. That gives you stress, that how long can you continue that process? But for us, it translates into these extremely tangible things. So what I would like to do is perhaps be the person who talks about mental health in a very tangible infrastructure that is actually changeable. And that might be, we actually had a discussion before this, and so perhaps the third question will deal more with it. But I would like to just convert it into tangibles. The same thing is for housing as well. There is no such thing as affordable housing. Housing is a mess. And so that is a huge point. And the last point that, I mean, in all of this infrastructure is the lack of recreational spaces, social spaces, public spaces. What does that do to you? So if everyone who's sought therapy, you would know that de-stressing, finding joy, finding spaces to relax is so important for your everyday life. But if you don't have those public spaces, recreation spaces, social spaces, none of that is going to happen. And if you're only seeing a rise of inequality in the city, that also means, going back to your point of privilege, old parts of the city have playgrounds like the one right behind here, where it's free access to recreate. Do you know how much it costs to play badminton for 1 hour? $300. How many people can afford that? And how many in fact, we did a project in 2018-19, which was mapping recreational, social, cultural space in the whole city. There's this beautiful maps that we have out there. I think Sobian will dig it out at some point. But it was a very stark contrast on the core of the city having public infrastructure, and all the parts around the outer ring road and the new areas having all private infrastructure. There was just absolutely no public parks and facilities. So all these areas, which are like where roads are not present, you're just living in these box houses, and then you have no free places to be. You have nowhere to relax. You're in extremely stressed environments where the road is dusty, you can't breathe properly, there are no trees, and then you also don't have places to de-stress, you don't have any of that. That's a huge thing, and that's where the city is growing. That's what the reality of the city is. 60-70% of the city is going to be there. That's where your city is going to be. So nobody talks about mental health from the equation of infrastructure that is highly, highly solvable. We can solve this. It is tangible. So I just want to say that, and the one sort of point that I often talk about is that I lived in Bombay for a couple of years, and I used to always talk to people about shared joy and shared misery. Bombay has the train. No matter, unless you're a billionaire like Ambani, you take the train. And so there is a shared misery to that train. If you are at Borivali at 8 o'clock in the morning, there are 3,000 people along with you trying to get into that damn thing. Most of us will be struggling to get into that train. There is shared misery which you can take certain joy from. And people will hold you, yeah. If you're at the gate, people will hold you. Like, the city holding you is a real phenomena there. And if you have the mistake of going into a Virar train, which I don't know if you're familiar with it, Virar is right up there in the north, God help you. If you tell somebody, hey, I came here by mistake, because you have to apologize to be in that train, your bag will carry and find itself in the center of the bogie, and people will take care of you. This thing of resilience that everyone talks about in Bombay is that idea of shared. The shared misery that we all find ourselves in the same thing, which Bangalore does not. Bangalore is a polycentric city with lots of different experiences which do not come together as much as they would like. But in Bombay, you have the beach, you have the sea. Everybody can experience that for free. You just have to step out and go to the nearest beach, and there is free air. There is good sea. I mean, okay, sea is not that good, it's black. But the breeze is there, right? You have relief. When it rains, there's no one, at least for the first few rains, everyone enjoys themselves till it starts flooding. But even in the flood, everyone goes through it. So this idea of shared joy, shared misery has to be explored a little further, but I'm sure many of you might be feeling it that it's not as true here. Yeah, so I'll stop.
Thanks so much. All of you, I think, yeah, maybe everyone has equitable access to their mics. Yeah, thank you for also bringing yourselves to this conversation. I love that we're drawing from our own childhoods, our memories, which also makes me think that in the way that you so vividly described, this, there's clearly a value in bringing lived experiences to the table, right? I wonder how in each of your work, you're able to bring that in and into the room in constructive ways, in a way that people can engage with. Particularly at this time when, as I was saying earlier, we all know we've gone through something, and it seems like the mental health needs of all of us as a people are only going to rise, right? How do we acknowledge this elephant in the room? How do we talk about it by saying, oh, here, Padma, also in the way that you were saying, I hear you, how do we make that space for listening, for actually patiently saying, okay, I see that there is stuff someone's going through. I want to honor and respect that and listen to you and take that moment. How are you able to do this in your own work right now?
I'll talk about the Blue Line project in the context. It's part of the Mindscapes project. The Blue Line, my co-facilitator Vamsi is also here. Vamsi is a theatre maker, and I was doing this project with him and another artist called Nisha. We started this pre-COVID. We were looking at creating a theatre piece based on our own personal experiences of our own identities. You were talking about, what our fragmented identities mean. We started working on a play based on that. I'm a Bahujan woman. There's a Dalit artist, there's a Muslim artist, so the three of us together bringing our own identities and what it means to stay in our identities, take up space and talk about our stories. Right? So that was the play we started doing it, and it started off as a purely creative exercise, but it became this very therapeutic, cathartic space for the three of us. We're like, oh, this happened to you. Oh, this happened to you. I also experienced this. Oh, did this happen to you in your school? Did this happen in your neighborhood? So I realized for the first time in all the life I've lived in different professions I've experienced in thing, for the first time I had a shared space where somebody else was going through the same experience as me. And that's when it hit me that, and I started looking, I already started experiencing this thing of why is there nobody else like me in the room? Somebody who grew up in Yeshwantpur. I haven't met anybody yet in the different professions I've been in. Somebody who went to the school I went to. Other than my own classmates that I bump into, I don't see anybody else in the different professions. So how come that I'm always the exception? Right? It's not like I'm the exceptional, but I am the exception. And I kept looking at it. And then when this whole experience, we started looking at the play, which never happened because of COVID, I started looking at spaces. Where are these spaces that I am able to connect with people, where people have shared experience just like me? And I realized this spaces like really small pockets, especially in a city in Bangalore. I have to go looking for it. And this thing of, I'll talk about this, there is this very popular forward that goes around every few years about the glory years of Bangalore, right? About what used to happen in St. Mark's Road, how Brigade Road, how there was the pool, right? That thing is called snooker thing used to happen, how the parties used to happen. That's not the Bangalore I know at all. Right? I grew up in the same 90s, 80s and 90s, but I'm like, who the hell are these people and where were they and why did I not see any of this? Right? I would come, like I would dress up and like feel all posh because once in 3 months I would come to Brigade Road and feel extremely old, window shopping, I recognize that. Right? Because I can't afford anything else. But Commercial Street I would go more often. Malleshwaram 8th Cross I can go more often. Right? So all these ideas of Bangalore that is so popular is so alien to me. Right? So I've been very aware of these alienation I feel in my own city. I'm very fond of this city. I've always lived here. So I feel very closely and very, despite all its flaws, I still love the city. So I've been wondering, so what is missing? What are the missing pieces, right? And that's when we started looking at these shared spaces where we can talk about these experiences. And that's how the Blue Line happened. We started looking at where the student communities from Dalit, Bahujan and Adivasi communities, where do they go when they face discrimination in educational institutes, which is a lot, we don't talk about it. Not too far from here, IISc right here, has been having a spate, trigger warning, has been having a spate of suicide attempts and death by suicide by students. And what did the organization do? IISc, the Premium Science Institute, removed the ceiling fans from the hostels. They do have, I'm guessing they do have, because it's mandated, have counselors on campus, but they're not accessible and not everybody gets it. So what happens to these students? That's how Blue Line came about. So we wanted to create that space where people can come and share shared misery that you're talking about, to know that we are not alone. I am not this alien person who's experiencing something so strange. Lot of other people from my community are experiencing similar things. And what do we do with this shared misery? Yes, there is shared misery. Okay, now we've acknowledged. Then how do we keep building support communities to take this further? That's where the Blue Line comes in, and that's the path to shared, lived experience coming into my work. I do that with my therapy work also. I work with communities and see what is it that they need. Right? There is this other thing of psychiatry and mental health is a lot of it is our textbooks are still Western. Right? So how do you bring our sensibility? I don't mean Indian cultural sensibility in the nationalistic way, but our lived reality, our what is real for me. There are 22 scheduled languages in the country. Not one of them has a word for mental health or depression. How do I talk about this then? I can easily say mental health, depression, I can talk about safe spaces. Most of you will get it. Right? Even if you don't know the word, by context you will make sense of it because English is a language you are familiar with. But what happens when we speak in other languages? So that's another thing that we are trying to work with. A lot of these experiences, it's bodily. I'm showing this is how I felt. This happened to me. There is no words for it. So how do we make sense of it? That's the thing we're trying to do with Blue Line in projects like Blue Line.
Hello? Yeah. Some things that I'll draw from yours and connect. Also, I started working, so I was working on this couple of small documentaries about sanitation workers about a year ago. Yeah, about a year ago. This was during the end of COVID, second wave or something like that. I can't remember exactly what was the situation, but it was about the situation of, there were different issues. One was the salary issue. There was the toilet issue about the sanitation workers that they were facing. And these were short films, and we were trying to, I was the editor for this. There's this organization called Mara, who have this magazine called Bengaluru, and I was doing it for that. And of course, there were interviews that happened, all of that. The issues were discussed, so on, and then I was given the footage to edit. I edited it, and then we had a screening for the people who were involved in this whole thing. And a couple of them were speaking to me and to some other people there about how this does not work. Shanmugam, who is now a very good friend, Shanmugam was like, what's the point of this documentary? Who is going to see this? Sure, I mean, it's not even going to the TV, right? It's not going to news channel. So what's the point of making a documentary? I know that this is well intended. We are these issues need to be spoken about, but who gets to watch it? So basically, it's about the distribution also, right? Who, where, what, all of that. And then the other thing that he said was there is no dignity in this. I wouldn't understand it at that point. But and then he proposed a solution himself. He said, I have already got an idea. It's a masala film. It's a commercial film. It needs to come in the theaters. It's about the life of, it's a biopic of a Paurakarmika, a sanitation worker. And the idea is that this sanitation worker wants to be a lawyer, does not get access, but with the help of internet, becomes a lawyer, as in a street lawyer kind of a thing. So, general idea. And we started working on this script together, which we still are. Slowly, whenever he gets time, I get time, so on. And so this was just before, and we're still working on this, and then this happens just before the film project with Mindscapes starts. And the Mindscapes film project is drawing a lot from this, and because this is also informing my practice as a film facilitator or whatever you want to call this thing, about this idea of who gets to make this film, who gets to express their imaginations, and who gets to create these narratives with which we look at the people around us. And again, the idea of dignity becomes extremely important in this, because how do you portray? And however much nicely I might frame a particular thing, and however much nicely I might do this interview and all that, it's not their frame. It's not a frame of reference. It's not. It's my frame of reference and not theirs. There is a certain necessity for us to work with the behind the scenes. Sure, the kind of films that are coming out. Sure, there are some films that are addressing caste issues, so on. And as Shanmugam again says, I'm not going to wait for a Paranjit to do this film. And what we have to also understand is that what is happening behind the scenes is as important, or perhaps now more important, than how the consuming of the film or the video, whatever, itself. Because, and I'm not just talking about representation here in the crew or cast or whatever, but it's also about how we make these films. It's about the process with which we talk to each other. What are the spaces in which, because production is production, it's literally the word production, it's so industrial. And what are these spaces between work? And what are the interactions that we have among each other? These all matter. And till we are not willing to stop looking at this as production, it doesn't really make much of a difference. And when I say that, I mean that we need to look at it as something which is coming out as a conversation. We need to look at people talking to each other and not just always think about, okay, we have to make a film, we have to make a film. I'm just these are just thoughts that I have in my head. Yeah, so lived experience, right? And this is it's not just about bringing, say for example, if we are talking about mental well-being, it's not just about framing the person in front of the camera, but it also depends on who and how is controlling this narrative, or rather directing this narrative. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it's difficult to remember the question after listening to extremely interesting sort of comments. And I think the value, the way I would like to sort of look at this, the value of lived experiences perhaps by looking at 3 stakeholders that have recently been part of our projects. So we run something in Malleshwaram called the Malleshwaram Urban Living Lab, which is a collaboration between Malleshwaram Social, the local community group here, and us. And we started it during COVID, actually, like I think April 2020, if I'm not wrong. And we started with spare, if I'm not pronouncing this word correct, but kate matu, I think that's what the phrase is. Matu. So, which is basically a series of conversations during COVID time to understand the problems that community was facing, but also like just listening to all these issues that were coming up during COVID. And just so ripe at that point. And a couple of those times we heard people talking about mental health, right? Remember, a lot of the community here is slightly on the older side. And so what they were feeling on the ground was, of course, with COVID, you couldn't really get out much. And a lot of old people were missing sort of having those spaces to just go out in a park and or just go shopping or do anything that is there. Plus, at the same time, in Malleshwaram, there has been a huge issue which the community has been trying to solve about walkability. Like just not having pavements to walk around. The whole area is dug up. And for younger people, okay, you can just hop, skip, and jump over all the broken things and you treat it like a game. But that's not true for the people who can't do that. And what that causes, I think Sobe and I were talking in the car about it, that what does it cause when you can't occupy your own neighborhood? When you can't get out of the street and occupy your own street? And it's not that when you're a little older, you're already facing some of those conditions by yourself, that okay, your body is not able to do everything, but the environment is not letting you do that. And this thing that you're shunned towards the interior, you are not able to, and the COVID, of course, piling on, was a very real phenomena for us. The second example that I would like to just look at is in Banaswadi, we are doing a project right now which is looking at urban design of a street, which includes a Raj Kalwe in it. And it's a beautiful Raj Kalwe in Banaswadi. And one of the things that the people told us is that there's no place for children to play at all. And so what happens to the lived experience of the child at that point, or the parent who is there as well, when the child has no place to go? And this is happening everywhere, I'm sure. But it really comes out when people talk about it. So for us in Banaswadi, it was a very real thing. Hey, children don't have anywhere to go. And the streets are unoccupied. There were like speeding vehicles on that road that were preventing children to play. Very simple phenomena. How many streets allow children to play? God only knows. It'll be like 0.0001%. But these are like very real phenomena in that person's life, in that neighborhood, that community that is going through it every day. So every day, the inability to express yourself to your fullest, that causes stress. And a lot of it is like expressing yourself as physical ways, but also mental ways, and sort of doing that. The third example that I would like to just also talk about is a couple of years ago, we were supporting a school called Khwab, Karnataka Welfare for the Blind. It's near Majestic area. And this is a school that basically has half sighted children and half non-sighted children. And we had, in our previous avatars, managed to get 10 lakhs to them. Actually, they pitched the project, so we kind of just allocated that money at that point. So we are helping them develop a park into a blind-friendly park. Very simple brief. Can you make the park safe for these children? How difficult is that? What was the park? Park was basically a ground which had a lot of gravel in it. You wanted to make sure the people, when they are non-sighted, don't fall, because when they used to fall, they would injure themselves. And so they would play football at 4 o'clock in the morning, because there was nobody on the road and nobody in the park, in the ground. And I followed them one of these nights, and they would play with a ball that makes some noise, right? Now, imagine these, for them, it's already hard enough, right? Life is already hard enough. And then it is the principal of that school that did not allow this project to happen. And I was interacting with basically the national captain of the blind team, who was the coach for these students. And he was desperate. Hey, let's do this because the children have a way to get out. But these children literally could not even play football to the fullest out there because the ground was not allowing. They could not walk to the park by themselves. They actually, the sighted and the non-sighted would hold hands and go. But can you imagine, like, you can't even walk by yourself to the nearby park, which is like to few hundred meters. Now, multiply that with all the people that have some kind of disability or some kind of way that limits them, and you're just saying simple things like that don't exist. So these lived experiences, what we see in our projects, that again, go back to very real projects. Yeah, I think that's it. So there's a humanization component here that I think comes out for us a lot.
Thank you. Thanks, Ankit. I think I just discovered that in my head, this event ended at 8 p.m. and I just discovered on the poster that it says 8:30. So it seems like we have some bonus half hour. So I will, which is amazing, because I think just in response to what Ankit was sharing, I'll share a little story. In 2016, Astha and I worked on putting together the Delhi Walk Festival, which I was curating. In one of the walks, which I was able to do was, I co-designed this walk with this visually impaired person. And this is in Delhi, so we got a group of participants to walk through Khan Market, which is one of the fancy, shiniest, most expensive neighborhoods in India. And the intention for the walk was to just get ordinary persons to, or able-bodied people to experience what it would be like to be visually impaired and do it. So we got the exercise, so we started at the metro station and we blindfolded half the participants on this walk. And then people had to be in pairs where one person, and then Mr. Gulati actually taught the group how to walk with a stick, and then we blindfolded the people. And really what we did was spend the next 45 minutes through the inner lanes of Khan Market blindfolded. And very quickly what people learned in the first 15-20 minutes is that firstly, once you learn the ropes, of course if you can't see, you're listening, smelling much more than you would ordinarily, so your instincts are much higher, etc. But secondly, the moment, I mean, there was a partner who was meant to guide you or just to save you from harm, right? And in the first sort of 30 minutes, of course, the partner was super involved. They were trying to make sure they hold their hand really tight and so on. And then we switched roles. And what was really moving is that in the second half, the person who was blindfolded was then guiding and figured that actually let this person figure out where they want to go, you know? And that's what was transformational, that the person who was then designing this experience or the city or the school ground in this manner would first maybe need to just really bodily experience what being visually impaired is like, and then maybe the way these interventions come through is completely different, you know, so that we're not assuming for other people, we're not assuming for what their challenges might be and so on. Yeah, I just thought I'd share this story and take this to, in fact, the final question for the panel before we open up to the audience, which is really about how, particularly in this point where all of your really valuable work does draw so much from lived experiences of people, how do we then make that final switch where, at least in our case, we felt that we really needed to make a space where 500 people should have done the walk, but in real life only about 30 did, you know, so you only change those 30 lives. But how do we then take these learnings, particularly from art-based engagement, which are able to help us draw much more than what text does and so on, and really convert them to design briefs in your case, you know, constructive conversations on policy and so on. And I was thinking more specifically with Padma, what you were sharing, I mean, it'd be interesting to hear how you think, what would be interesting in documenting the learnings or insights from the Blue Line in order to invisibilize some of these challenges, right? Visibilize, sorry, not invisibilize. In your case, Varun, you know, particularly thinking about, like, if you think that non-fiction is in fact capturing the imagination of the real world much more, firstly, what role does language play? Who this story is for then, and does it change when you speak to a local sanitation worker, or when you speak to a funder or a global audience or a person from Malleshwaram, right? Like, how does that change when you tell the same story to different people? And with Ankit, I think particularly around just this inability that you were talking about, right? Where particularly the kids who are growing up on the sidewalk, not realizing that that's not what the baseline should be. Padma and I were having a brief chat about just baselines, and how does one start to talk about, hey, it could be that what your everyday life is doesn't need to be like that. And how does some of your work sort of get to that? Does anyone? We go with the same order.
I think the children are only like one stakeholder. I think the thing is, what we are realizing is that there's so many. And so I think very, very broadly, what might be interesting to talk about is, while we were doing the cultural mapping, the mapping project to look at cultural recreation and social space in the city, we discovered Roy Oldensberg, in which he's talked about third spaces. And that's basically like first space is home, second space is work, third space is community spaces. And there's a huge amount of literature on this, and which is basically supposed to be places that are nearby, and there's like definitions to this, right? They are nearby, they are accessible to everybody, you're not allowed to exclude them, there's all of that. That ground is a third space. Cafes are third spaces to some degree. Neighborhood community centers are third spaces. So like for me, there are like, these convert into like real tangible things, right? The other thing I would talk about as a process thing is what we have found is a lot of our community-based work, doing local projects has been a way for people to find community, to find common purpose. Like in Banaswadi, when we started the project with regard to street design, literally the local community was not as strong in that sense. But because of the project, everyone came together and they used to talk about this. That, hey, because of this, we have all found each other and found a common goal, and there's a lot of that. And so, that has been a very powerful factor of driving new imagination, but also like finding these ways of coming together, and through that, find a sense of place, sense of community, and also like find ways to have more ownership and control over your life and your surroundings. Right? I can now I can change. I don't take for granted that I'm in Cooktown now. The trees are awesome. By the way, I live in Cooktown too. After a lot of time of moving through various neighborhoods, that is the best for sure. But I'm sure like other neighborhoods around posher neighborhoods are even better. But what I'm trying to say is that these realities are not static. If you're saying that neighborhood is good and that is bad, they actually are changeable. And that's what these community projects have been all about. That you can actually change your reality, physical reality, and therefore change the living condition, and in this case, radically influence your mental health and livability of that place. And this opportunity is extremely doable. So these two things is what I would like to say. Just the opportunity of third spaces and the power of local community projects and local communities driving those visions through that exercise.
Yeah. Oh, this one is louder. Yeah, one thing that comes to my mind is that we need to definitely work more with fiction. When I say that, I mean in the sense of we always talk about the city or the mental health, and like, yeah, sure, lived experiences are lived experiences, but much of it is informed by all the imaginations, as I was saying earlier, around us, and fiction plays a very big role in this. especially like, for example, when I say visual imagination, obviously films come to my mind, and not excluding Instagram or TikTok or whatever, not TikTok anymore. So, but anyway, the amount of fiction, the ways in which rather fiction informs our lives needs to be thought about more than like one film of Yash comes and suddenly everyone has a beard. It matters. I mean, even if these small things, they might look small, but they do inform how we behave with each other and how we behave with our surroundings. And if that is the case, who is telling these fictional stories, right? And it's not just enough, I mean, like if you're talking about stakeholders and partners and all that, it's not just enough to study fiction. It's also important to create fiction and make spaces for these fictions, for these fictional stories or whatever to be created by the people who need to tell their stories. Yeah, I think that's it.
I agree with both of you when you say that, the community participation is a huge aspect of where we can take this, right? This government policies, of course there is, but we all know how they get implemented or not get implemented depending on the case. There is that. So community participation is an important aspect, and but here's also the thing, right? Like there are RWAs, the Resident Welfare Associations. Who are the people who are running it? There's a certain age, male, and depending on the neighborhood, probably upper caste also. Then what happens to the rest of us? We don't get a say. So even in community participation, there needs to be a more, I mean, I hate to use this word, but democratization is what I'm, is coming up with. We've made a mess of democracy, but democratization is where we need to go, true democracy. Somebody introduced me to this word called sociocracy, which apparently is more inclusive and better than democracy, but yet to see that. So there is that aspect of it that we need to look at. So the community coming together. But in my experience, community coming together also has a lot of hurdles, right? Like when we put out the call for Blue Line, of course, social media is the thing now, so we put it up on there. Everybody was excited about it, but we had 0 registrations when we wanted to start in March. So we're like, what's happening? Is this something that we imagined that it is needed and that's not needed on the ground level? What's happening? So then we, the Vamsi and I started reaching out to people on the ground level who are working with the communities and realized that, it had not reached that place at all. So then we had to like in-person meeting, calls, going down, all that meeting people happened, and we still had 2 registrations only. So, and we don't have the exciting numbers that we would like to have in this thing. Not because there is no need, because we're not reaching the right set of people, and there is an actual barrier there. And even with, Vamsi is a design guy, I am good with words. Between the 2 of us, we were very careful about how we are wording the posters and the call out, messaging and all that. And we even did it in Telugu and Kannada, because between the 2 of us, we can pretty much speak all the South Indian languages. So we put it out in different languages, and yet when we said, so in English it says, if you are a student from the DBA community and you're facing hostile environment in your higher education thing, this is a space for you to come and talk about it. Kannada translation is pretty much the same, right? People wrote back and saying, but what is this? When you say hostile, exactly what do you mean? For us, it was very clear. For the people on the Instagram and Facebook, it was very clear. The media, some write-ups, it was very clear. But they were like, hostile andre? Like exactly what? So then we used the term for discrimination if you're facing this. So that's what we were talking about. There is no language to this. And if I don't know I'm being discriminated because of my caste location, how do I access help? So the baseline has to be redrawn here. Right? I am sitting up here in my Cooktown house and with my Instagram and all that. That makes jack of a difference to the people on the ground, because that's not their reality, right? And yes, of course, now we have people who've signed up and we're having fascinating conversations about it, and we are mostly overwhelmed and with joy and satisfaction every week. But the reality is language is an issue. Right? I will say safe spaces. This is a safe space. English-speaking people will understand. Kannada translation, it literally means safe space, but that's not the context they use it in. So what does that mean? They're like, okay, why is it not a safe space? Should we be worried about it? So what does safe space look like? Right? Simple things like touch. Some of the participants, I mean, I'm a very touchy-feely person. I hug people, I shake hands with people if they're not comfortable with hugs. But there are people who are hesitating. So why is that? Because you come from a certain community, there is a fine for touching people from the other community. So the participants are hesitating. They're waiting to see if they are allowed to touch each other. It's as basic as that. Thing that I take for granted, thing that I'm very, it's important for me. Touch is a very important aspect for me. And in COVID, this came up, right? Because a lot of us were stuck at home, especially if you're single and not living with family. The touch-hungry thing was a real thing. People were missing human touch. Imagine not having access to it because of your caste location. Right? So these are the things that we need to bring into the conversation, and how we are still figuring it out. To answer your question, how do we build evidence from here? Fiction is a great way of doing that. I also come from journalism and documentary background, and I know there's only a certain set of people read it, and these days people don't even trust it. Who trusts news reports? Nobody trusts news reports anymore, right? Even if it's so-called the right news organizations, nobody trusts it. So how do we build and reach out thing? I think fiction is a great way to go with that. And other cultural, we work with theater. I work with applied theater. We're looking at producing a zine at the end of the Blue Line thing, for which we had to sit and explain what the hell a zine is and what it looks like, right? So we are getting down to the brass tacks of it and working with that and building from there. And I'm happy to do that, but the thing is, it's not enough, right? And we need more such spaces where such things happen. We're hoping Blue Line will go places, but there's so much of it to do, and to work with people like in the design space, in the fiction space, to come together and create these spaces. I think that's where the future is.
Thank you. And I think that really sort of illustrates the role that projects like yours and a community of projects like yours can do, and that's really the intention of a project like Mindscapes, to bring these conversations to the surface, and then also put them in front of policymakers, researchers, to actually say, this is what's really happening on the ground, So reflect on whether it's a phone helpline you want to do, or what is it could be that that's the starting point, but for a country like India, now there's enough evidence to build 5 other things on top of that, right? Yes.
I just want to add that we need to stop building cities, making policies for cis able-bodied men, and include the rest of the population, which is the vast majority, which we don't get included in. Majority of us in this room are not included in the policy designs.
Thank you. Yeah, with that, we'll open this up to questions. So I'm hoping there are some mics yes, there are some mics. And in case, if you have a question, comment, or thought for either of the panelists, please raise your hand. Please. It'll be great if you could introduce yourself and then...
Hi, I'm Saili. I moved to Bangalore less than 2 years ago. I'm from Mumbai. Yay for the trains. So yeah, I think this is something that I see, and I always say this, that as it is, it's very difficult to make friends as an adult. When you go to school, when you go to college, you just put a bunch of random people in one room, and then they find somebody that they get along with. But as an adult, you either go to work or go home. And if you live with your family, that's already people you know. I've heard stories of people who try to live together but don't really become friends with the people that they even live with. And there's, I mean, bunch of things that happen at work because of which those friendships might be difficult to maintain. And then when we're missing community spaces, how do we do that? And a lot of times, again, unpopular opinion probably, but in Bangalore, when I open my mouth, and there's startup culture, there's tech culture, there's IT, there's VC funding, and everybody wants to talk about how there can be an app to solve this problem. And now we get like groceries in 10 minutes, but I don't know who I'm getting groceries from. And I think that there's so much like alienation with our whole life because, oh, great, I can get groceries in 10 minutes, but I don't leave my house for days and I don't meet people. So I don't meet people that I can become friends with. I don't meet people in any context for me to be able to build relationships. I don't know my sabjiwala. I don't know, you know, the person that I get breakfast from or anybody for that matter because there's an app for it. And then, I mean, you know, this sort of combined with what's happening with mental health. I think Bangalore also has like a divide in terms of language, which I think Mumbai doesn't. Like I think also because of the trains, but in general, you just get put in that classroom, in that train compartment. You meet people from different walks of life. There are stories of people that have become friends over time that get the exact same train. And yeah, like where else do you hear people becoming friends because they get the same train together and they've shared their whole lives in that like 30-minute journey on that train ride every day. But Bangalore doesn't have those spaces. Bangalore has very few of those spaces. And I think that, I don't know, I probably live in my echo chamber, but the language barrier between, you know, me not being able to speak any South Indian languages and somebody else probably not being able to speak to me in English or Hindi. And therefore that integration doesn't happen. So while I might love to, you know, get like in running auto, that's what it's called apparently, I cannot because I don't know what he's saying and he probably doesn't understand what I'm saying. And that makes it even harder to build relationships. And so then how do we do this? Because I feel like Bangalore lives in like two separate compartments. The IT sector, like the startup, you know, people who tech code, go to like these tech parks, get cabs or shared cabs and pooled cabs and stuff. And then people who've been living here, who are Bangaloreans. And I think that these people live two very different lives. Yeah, I don't think that was a question, but.
No, thank you for sharing. That resonated with me, Saili, but if it resonated with anyone else in the room, find the girl in the yellow top. Maybe you want to make a new friend. And which is why, I guess, we need real spaces like the Cityscripts Festival that really bring people together, you know, who were curious about something. So thank you for doing that, actually. Already that you're here is the first step. And yeah, hopefully you make a friend tonight. But any reflections on that, actually?
Actually, I have a word for people. I call it the donut identity. Phrase for people who are like me, like this is like me. It's called donut identity. I call it the donut identity. There's no center, but there's a lot of things on the side. And so you have to make an effort to connect the constellations to create the rest of this. And what I've found at least, and by the way, coming back to the Cubbon Park signage, I've had a love and hate relationship with the city, but the Cubbon Park project gave me the first indication that, okay, I was here. And the reason that happened is because I discovered the city for myself as the city, as my city. The sense that I know Cubbon Park now more than anybody else. And hey, I created that little thing that you can go see. Hey, but I know this is mine now because if you see, most of the city falls into this nostalgia, oh my, like, whatever, like, or corner house. And like, they have memories of that city as theirs. And so what I have found is that these community-based projects, volunteering for these things, working in your groups, can give you a sense of yours. And that you're more than your work, that you're more than the migrant, you're more than this. And I find that very powerful. And it is really a way of making your environment, which people take for granted, that I think I mentioned earlier, that things are not static. Everything is on the move. It's the becoming. And so if you take your identity also as a becoming, there's a lot that we can do around mental health as a result of that. And so this donut identity is an identity of making. So some people are donut whole, they've never moved anywhere, they live there, born there, done that. Hey, but the rest of us can, like, there is this other thing. And so you have to create that identity, and it can be created across many lines. And a lot of that has to do with what the city can be made to allow. Let me put it that way.
I mean, it also connects in some way to what Varun was saying in terms of production, right? Like this city making also seems to be something that we often think is only in the hands of the planner or the architect, but maybe we're all city makers in that way by just being here and then becoming. Yeah, very powerful.
Sure, start. Hi, I'm Abhishek. A lot of what all of you have discussed actually struck me with one of the incidents that we had. So while I was in Hyderabad, there's the Osman Sagar Lake. It's beautiful. You have these rocks. You can go sit there. But the only problem is the police will not let you, right? And for some reason, I think, and I've always felt this, whenever I've gone to Goa and all of this, and I see people who are not from our country and the way that they use public spaces and they're able to, and I lived in Chennai, and we used to go wet our feet, eat sundal, come back, right? And that's literally how we've interacted very transactionally and really not using the space. And every time, now we've learned and we said, hey, it's a great day, COVID, we want to go sit by the lake. We paid fine, we were almost, there was a lot of thing that happened. It's a different thing that we carried some beers. I guess that's, but immaterial. We would have still been in a lot of trouble for doing that. And I kind of wonder what this means to not have the right to roam in our cities. And even more so from people like, sure, not here, I go to a cafe, I go to a mall, I go to this 10 different other experiences that I can afford. And a lot of these spaces are spaces that were villages before, which are getting gentrified, and fine, gentrification is one, but their lands are getting claimed away. And these are not lands that they own, these are lands that they could roam about and walk around, but now suddenly they've lost the right to. As a child, I used to go climb trees, go on these rocks, take a swim. Today, suddenly this is government land, it's restricted and I can't use it anymore. And what you do is you send these people back to your malls or all of these that you spoke about, which the imagination that the city creates for you, which takes away spaces and gives you these other constructed spaces which speak to a lot of your production consumption cycles that you have where they want you to be in a particular place. All of that, and I wonder, maybe it's more so for you, how do you deal with something like that, and what is the government's, and I almost wonder if it is this entire bias that people have, that if you're going there, you're doing something wrong. And my mom always says this, right, and even the other way, she says, whenever we see people who are drunk in these takeouts and they're walking around, they're having fun, and everybody looks down upon them and says, gee, right? And she's like, you guys do the same thing in pubs. They don't have pubs. They do these on the roads. And there's this entire notion that we also have on what, and that seems to actually come down to how we are policed, right? Drinking in public, sure. I mean, I've always thought, create a space, create systems that allow you to enjoy these spaces. And everyone seems to think that Indians are not capable of enjoying spaces. And I think it's very far misconstrued because we've never had systems that actually allowed us to experience it. In fact, I think we did experience it. It was taken away from us, and now you're saying you need to use it a particular way or you don't use it at all. So I'm just curious to see what your thoughts are on.
Bangalore's parks, it's open, it's closed during the day. You can't access it. Even during COVID, when public parks were the only place where we could go to, Kaban Park was open briefly, and we were not allowed to have picnics. The child was carrying a ball with us, tiny child. And the security was like, you can't take the ball inside. It's against the rules. Who is making those rules? And for whom? And what is this that public park cannot be accessed during the day? You would either have to be an early bird, which I am not for sure, right? 5 to 10 in the morning you have to go, or like 4 to 7:30. 7:30, it's out. If you are a late office goer and you want to access park, you have to go to Cubbon Park. Okay? So there is these restrictions. Yes, the design is problematic. I was thinking when you're talking about these public spaces, who gets to access and where, I was thinking about this book called Why Loiter. You might have come across it. It's a book about public spaces accessibility, particularly in Bombay. But I think it's a thing that applies everywhere. So the book talks about who gets to access public spaces, especially in context of gender in this book, but also who gets excluded. Right, Richardstown and very close in my neighborhood, there are beautiful trees, rain trees with the katte around it. You can sit and talk, hang out there. But none of our neighbors hang out there. People from other neighborhoods come there because they don't have trees or kattes there. They'll come and sit here. But these people who own the houses on the street complain about it, saying, oh, this is our area, these guys are coming and drinking and romancing is a bigger problem here. Because drinking, you really don't want to mess with them, but two teenagers are sitting and just holding hands, then God save us. So this is a thing, right? All these neighborhoods, who owns these neighborhoods? It's a public space. The tree is put by BBMP, they are taking care of it, you're paying tax for it, but it's nammane munde, we will not let you sit here. You can't romance in front of my house. Right? Public park, oh God, there are too many couples. I couldn't take my 3-year-old. Why? What's wrong? Right? What is he learning that he's not already seeing on TV? These are the kind of things, like these are the kind of restrictions about public spaces that we really need to challenge. And this thing of what Abhishek was sharing was this, these people don't have a space. That's why they're on the streets. We talk about these colonies, bastis, slums. They're always on the street. Everything is on the street. Where else do they go? There is no space. It's a single room house where probably 6-7 of them live. So what do they do to take a break? They have to come on streets. And you're taking that away from them because it's not looking nice for your aesthetic.
Say that when we were doing the participatory design workshop for Cubbon Park signage, we had a pie there in which we said, when do you come to the park? And like, who are you by some identity, age group, I think. And it was so revealing that there were people coming at all times of the day. And there was a newspaper guy who came and saw that and did an article on it. Like, you had to be told that people are occupying a park through the day. And I think one of those times somebody was telling us that there are people who are working in the government offices who after lunch come there to take a walk because they've eaten so much that you have to kind of walk away your lethargy. That is so interesting. And it led to an article talking about this park thing as if this is big news. But it was a thing. So yeah, this is a huge pain point. And I want to say that in one of these cases, I had spotted a sign in one of the parks in Victoria Layout where I had seen children not allowed in front of the gym, the open gym. And there's a huge hangama made about calling that out. Why? Because somebody, MLA or somebody had funded that whole thing, and so the sign was up. So how are you allowed to do that? How can the keys of the park go to a resident of that RWA? How dare you occupy a public space that is not owned by a resident? How dare you take that key and throw people out at 10 o'clock? And this thing that people don't go out and break the grills of the parks amazes me. It just absolutely mind-boggling to me. And they were throwing out cyclists from Cubbon Park as well. The fight is on. This is about the occupation of the city. And so I feel very strongly about this, that there has to be a greater movement to just tear down these things. Enough of this don't sleep on the bench and don't drink things.
There are parks that tell you have to walk in a certain direction. You go from left, clockwise and not anti-clockwise. And there will be somebody who will come and admonish you because you didn't see the thing or you just thought, okay, what will happen if I go this way? It's not, it's real.
I have to say that when we were doing the Cubbon Park signage, we were looking at the rules of the park. And we couldn't find one signage that had anything about allowing something to happen. It was always don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. So I think, Rohan, you were in office that time. And we were trying to whack our head around. How do we talk about what are you allowed to do? So we had to, so if you go see the signage now, the damage is not on me, on the rains and the parks. But the signage is good. Go see it. So, but you notice like how we were forced to talk about like the whole thing of what is not allowed and allowed, right? So, it's huge sort of issue. So, why does signage only say about what you're not to? And by the way, you can't walk on the grass anywhere in the thing. You can't play. You can't do anything. Who the hell decided all this? Like, why aren't there like bigger ideas around confronting and auditing these parks? Like, who the hell are you to do any of this shit? So, I think you should like go see it and tear some of the signage down.
Hello. So I hope you don't mind. I have a heavy laptop bag. So I'm Lakshmi. I'm an architect. I'm 23 years old, and I have my father calling me because it's late. I stay in the suburbs towards the Pina side. And all the infrastructure or all the nightlife is centered around the CBD, MG Road and other things. And the parts which I live in are not even, like after 8, so there's no street light, there's no public transport. Why is it that infrastructure in areas like CBD, the CBD area, Indranagar, Koramangala, are the highlight of the town, whereas basic necessities in areas where middle class or lower middle class stays, like me, something sidelined. So I always see, so if you know that I stay in a place where we have auto with 6 people in it to go 1 kilometer inside. So this is a thing in Bangalore where there is places where you have to share auto with 6 strangers and then reach your home. So when we talk about mental health, all these are contributing factors because I don't know who's going to be sharing a ride with me. I don't know how safe he or she is. And now, since I'm going to reach home at 9:30, there's a stress both with my parents and also with me. So one thing I've noticed is that all the policymakers, all the administrative representative people are not people who go out or come home from office at 8:30. There are people who go around in cars, not use public transport. So where is the representation of the real people who use facilities like at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock? You can't tell me to not go earn a living and come back home, no? So mostly, it's not that women are not there, but the MLA near my house, he's a 50-year-old and he's making policies, and these policies are not of any use for us. When I have to come home, the basic thing I need is a safe, secure road with lights. But what I get is a auto with 6 strangers with me. So I also feel this is because most of the infrastructure in the posh area is so much more happening thing, whereas minimum facilities in areas like the suburbs are something sidelined by both the government and policymakers. So this is something I want to ask. Is it really that the suburbs or the non-happening part of the city do not require the social and community spaces or the safety, basic safety, which we see?
This is reminding me of that, what is it called, Area 56 or whatever, those, that everyone, like, I don't know, I thought of that when you were talking about that, because this idea of surveillance as security also is there in places, and somehow we are very happy about it. Yeah. That was one thing that just came to my mind. But also I was actually thinking, I mean, also connected to Abhishek's idea, the question, or rather the what you're sharing about public spaces, is also about how we move from, even if it is from private to private spaces, that movement, or living in private space also, like the idea of home. just to give an example, like the rains that happened 3 days ago, Hoodie area, which is where the sanitation workers that I'm working with, 3 of the people that I'm working with are living in that Hoodie area. They have a settlement there. And the settlement is, so the government was supposed to give them land a long time ago. The land is already allotted or something like that. They have no access to it, or you know how these things work. So they have rented a space from a contractor, a large, I think 1 acre space, in which around 40 families live. And there is a large compound wall, a cement compound wall that sort of separates the settlement from the work that this contractor or whoever this person is doing. And during the rains, the wall fell. And it fell, obviously. Where will it fall? It will fall on the houses only. No, so it fell on the houses. So a good 6-7 houses were completely flattened. Thankfully, no one was there inside when this happened. 2 things come to my mind, like what happened after that. I was talking to some friend of mine, and because what happened was that I was speaking to Shanmugam, who is one of the sanitation workers, and Mukrana, and they were talking about, it happened in the afternoon or something, and we have already, the compound wall has been thrown away, and we have already reconstructed the house with whatever, tin sheets and all that. And I was sharing this with someone, and then they said, God, so resilient, no? And I was just wondering, like, this narrative of resilience that we have also built is one of the reasons of, it's a sad tragedy of the city. The resilience is not, like, I don't know how we do not think of it as we cannot afford not to be resilient, right? Like, I'm not talking about me, sorry. And this idea of resilience is one of the reasons why we do take for granted certain things are okay, certain things are not. And yeah, I was just thinking of that when you were talking about this. Yeah.
And also how systemically so much of the burden of being resilient also comes on the ones with the least amount of resources all the time.
And there is a script about resilience, right? If you're not resilient, something's wrong with you.
We also see this in research funding, in fact, of just the amount of the world that's curious or interested in how South Asia or parts of Africa are resilient is literally just that. Because no one actually has the means or the intention to give them levels of service or quality of service that they in fact duly deserve. So it is infuriating. You should be angry. Please draw about it. Great that you shared this with us.
And just to add to that, this is how mental health access also works, right? Like what happens to their mental health? That question she's asking is very valid. After 8 o'clock, if you can't go home, I'm freaking out on behalf of her. Because I've been there, right? And I'm like, okay, how is this going to be helpful? But these are the kind of things that's missing, the missing voices that you're talking about. This is the missing voice. Who's getting to say, this is the talking about infrastructure, the smart city that the whole city has been dug up for, right? Let's not get into the digging, but the majority of the funding in the country for smart city has gone into surveillance. They have installed cameras left, right and center, especially in Bangalore, and most of it has come from the Nirbhaya fund. Yeah. Most of Nirbhaya fund has been spent on installing surveillance cameras. None of us asked for it, right? And I was also thinking if this was in a tech forum, somebody would have proposed an app by now. And I've been in places, I've been invited to talk about, judge these tech hackathon kind of things where women in safety, because I'm the quota candidate, diversity candidate. So they were like, okay, come do this. And every one of the college students was proposing apps, for example, if she was going home, so that she can tell her parents what auto she is in, that is the safety aspect. Basically, add surveillance to your life. Whatever government is doing, then you give access to your location to your parents, because, we already do that. All the women have done it at some point or the other, continue to do it. But now there are more people saying this is the only way you can be safe. So the onus is on me to be safe. I have to install that app. I have to be ready with my umbrella to fight the fellow, right? But that's not how the systems need to be. That resilience is not what I want. I want the system to be resilient so that I don't have to be resilient. So that they don't need me as a therapist to, help them out with this.
Rekha suggests we have there's 2 more hands, oh wow, 3 questions, but maybe yours is the last.
My name is Janani. I am an architect and an urban designer, currently working as an assistant professor at a upcoming college in Bangalore. I would like to draw your attention back to the question where we were talking about public spaces actually being public or not in the Bangalore context, whereas many such public spaces are really public, let's say the Marine Drive or the Marina Beach for that matter, where they're not just recreational spaces for people to come and hang out or chill and meet their friends, but also they are multifunctional spaces in terms of the character that goes around them, or be the kind of activities that happen inside these spaces. Why is it that in Bangalore, which is actually a cosmopolitan city, and one of the major growing cities in the rest of the country that we are looking at, why is the system so rigid? The public space is so rigid. Just an excerpt from one of the site visits that we had with some of our students, just probably a handful of 10 to 15 of them, who managed to make it to Alsur Lake on a weekday evening time when the lakeside, the jogging track, everything was open. Just merely standing there, gazing at the water body, draws the attention of these surveillance security persons who are engaged at the entrance gates. And we are asked, why exactly are we here? It is our right, being a part of Bangalore, being a resident in any part of Bangalore, to be there. We don't need a required written permission to enter any such space. So why exactly are these public spaces so rigid in terms of entries and exits, the kind of people, the number of people coming into these spaces? And also with regard to the activities or the ancillary activities that come about outside of these spaces, maybe like informal markets, hawkers who are put, the police personals are shooing them away, right? Because people don't just come to the park for their jaywalking, but also maybe they are getting their daily supplies, daily green veggies, or maybe green leafy veggies from there. But this doesn't seem to be the idea that Bangalore as a city is going towards. Though many of these lakes are being redeveloped, reworked upon, but the underlying policies, the restrictions, the guidelines, the principles that these are based upon is just missing there. People are just talking about beautifying these lakes, beautifying the places around it, adding more softscape, hardscape, but nothing in terms of changing the underlying principle, which is the causative reason for all the problems that we're facing as residents, or anyone to be able to relate to Bangalore as a citizen. So that's my question.
Ankit, you'll have to take this one.
Okay, not working? Okay, it is working. So, I mean, this is a huge issue, and I think it requires many people to come together to raise it and collectively challenge it. And also, I mean, if you notice, the railing of Alsur Lake actually has pointy things on it. So even if you want to jump in the water, you'll die before you jump. So that is the kind of design that we are talking about, that it's in the details. It's about the gate entrance. It's about the nature of that gate, which is so huge that like you just cannot get in, throwing vendors out. The railings that are designed to just, you can't even lean on it and actually look into the water. Forget about like paddling in the dam, in the water itself. It requires all of these people to champion one lake and go at it. like think about reoccupying that lake and think about what the new programmatic should be. It requires that. Not enough of that is happening. People have just, there's apathy around it. So I think if there are more community champions, you will see a change. And we should be more loud about it, perhaps, like you are.
Sorry, I just remembered a quick incident which I'll just share. Again, connected to the public spaces thing. The first 2 meetings that have happened so far with the Paura Karmikas for this particular film, I mean, obviously we needed a public space for this happen. The first 2 meetings happened in a cemetery. Puram, I don't know where, like you take the right. And we did it in cemetery because one of the people was like, no one will ask us any questions here. Yeah, I just thought of sharing that.
Just adding to that, I went to a school which didn't have a playground, and the Alsur burial ground, the back of it is where I did all my sports from class 5 to class 10. So we walked through the burial ground, yeah, Dharwad. I did it in here, in Alsur. Right? I have fond memories of the cemetery because I've spent hours playing in that place. So I'm not, but that's the thing, I didn't have access to a playground.
Okay, yeah. Thank you for sharing. I don't think I need to close this in any way. I think we are going to be around for the next 15, 20 minutes. Come have a chat with us, share with someone else what you're going through. It's quite palpable that we're angry. As we're recounting stories of ourselves, we are, like often also now stuff will come up that has happened in the past and you've not even reflected on it. Give it that moment. As we build out these projects and conversations, we would keep sharing them with you, but also come share your worlds and experiences with us, and that would be super useful. And I guess, like just pointing to you, hopefully one of the hopes is that we're able to make outcomes that build evidence for that paradigm shift, So the next time, in case there is someone in power who's curious about what these better imaginations might be, we might have an actual report to say, hey, okay, this is what an alternative imagination might look like. But yeah, for that, we would need many more conversations like this, where we're able to share this with you all, and lots of work that all of these amazing practitioners are doing, and we're able to help them and work with them and learn from them. But thank you for your time, for your attention. Thank you.